I'm retired now, but I used to work as an inspector for both private companies and the county. My career had me checking on buildings to make sure everything was safe and up to code. After a while, I decided to work on my own, taking freelance jobs to see if I could manage without a big company backing me. Things were going well, but because of my job, I got some strange and unexpected requests. I was inspecting rundown buildings, DIY projects, and sometimes people asked me to lie about the condition. One day I got a call from a private home builder. They wanted me to inspect a house that was halfway finished. They planned to use my inspection for the county, but I suspected they were going to submit it as a fully finished building, which seemed shady to me. The house was in a quiet area, away from the rest of the new builds. It was a nice place, but it felt like something out of a mob movie. When I arrived at the house, I started my usual routine. I had my clipboard and flashlight ready to check every nook and cranny. As I walked through the house, I heard some strange noises and saw trash scattered around. I figured it might be a contractor finishing up the work. When I peeked into the master bedroom, I was surprised to find a woman who looked dirty and around 30 to 35 years old. She definitely wasn't working on the property. I asked if she was supposed to be there, hoping she was the home buyer's wife. She claimed it was her house and asked what I was doing there. I explained that I was the inspector and had scheduled with her husband and the contractor to do a full walkthrough. She seemed annoyed and went into the bathroom, making strange noises. At this point, I was getting creeped out and was ready to leave. This was well before cell phones, so I was on my own. Then things got even stranger. The woman came back with a huge kitchen knife and stabbed it into the drywall. I took a step back and asked what she was doing, trying to stay calm. She said she didn't have a husband and told me to leave. I realized she was homeless and had been living there for a few days. It was time to go. I put my clipboard on a shelf, checked my pockets for my car keys, and backed towards the exit. She pointed at my clipboard, saying I shouldn't leave it behind. I raised my hands to show they were empty and kept moving. She started breathing weird and I had to go back for the clipboard, which made her even more upset. She screamed and ran at me, scaring me so much I almost fell. Thankfully, she stopped short, but her screaming woke up a man in the house, a shirtless, tattooed junkie who looked even more dangerous. He started questioning me, thinking I was sent by the woman's husband. They owed him a lot of money and were paranoid, convinced I was there to cause trouble. I had to think quickly. I lied and said the husband was outside, which made them panic and run to the window to check. They worked themselves into a frenzy, peeking through the blinds and acting like true crazies. I used the chance to get out of the house and ran as fast as I could to the next cluster of new builds. I hoped to find help. I was lucky to find a construction crew working nearby. They were armed with hammers and saws, ready to help. I explained that I was a home inspector and that some druggies inside the house had caught me off guard and chased me over. The construction guys didn't hesitate. They went outside and confronted the druggies, holding them down and calling the police. The police arrived quickly and took the druggies away. The house was mostly fine except for the bathroom, which had crazy graffiti. It looked like something out of a horror movie with devil worship stuff carved into the walls. I was shocked but relieved that I got away safely. I felt really lucky that day because things could have gone much worse if they had been more coherent. I thanked the construction crew, even gave them some gift cards later as a token of my gratitude. It was a wild experience that I'll never forget. When I was around 16, something really creepy happened while I was alone in our apartment in the New Jersey suburbs. It was around 8 p.m. and it was super dark outside. I lived with my aunt in an old apartment on the 4th floor of a small complex. The front doors to the stairwell were supposed to have buzzers and locks, but they hadn't worked in forever. Our living room window looked down on the parking lot, and the walls were so thin you could hear everything outside, especially cars arriving. I had gotten used to hearing all sorts of sounds, but this night was different. That night, I heard a loud pickup truck. My uncles, who lived nearby, drove pickup trucks and visited often, so I looked out the window to see if it was one of them. But it wasn't. It was a beat-up old Chevy truck with rust all over it, and inside were 2 teenagers. The second I looked out the window, the driver pointed right at me, like he knew exactly who I was and where I lived. That freaked me out, so I stepped back. My heart was pounding and I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was wrong. As I was trying to shake off the weird feeling, there was a loud banging on the apartment door. The sound was so sudden and intense that it made me jump. I quietly walked to the door, trying to make as little noise as possible, and looked through the peephole. I couldn't believe what I saw: two jumpy teenage boys holding a Home Depot bucket. Inside the bucket were duct tape, a rope, a hammer, some wood, and a long serrated knife. I was terrified and stepped back from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't believe this was real. It seemed too crazy. I looked through the peephole again and didn't recognize either of them, which was weird because I knew pretty much everyone in my high school. Seeing them up close like that made my heart race even faster. Their eyes were wild and they were twitchy, like they were on something. Instead of calling the police, I worried about what my aunt would say if she found out. She was already super paranoid about kidnappings and stuff, so if she knew about this, I'd never get any freedom. My aunt's fears were based on the endless crime shows she watched, and she always imagined the worst scenarios. Through the peephole, I saw one of the guys leaning his head against the door to listen for movement. I knew this was my chance. When his ear touched the door, I slammed my hand against it and let out the loudest scream I could. They fell over each other and ran down the stairs. I peeked out the window and saw them speeding away in the truck. No neighbors came out to check on me, even though I know they heard me scream. Our walls were so thin that I could hear the neighbors sneeze, so I knew they had to hear me. The fact that no one came to help made me feel even more alone and scared. I never saw those guys or the truck again. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than 8 minutes. I started to doubt it really happened because it was so weird and there were no consequences. But I know it did. The big question that still bothers me is, was it random, or did they know I was home? The next day I went to school and tried to act like everything was normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I replayed the events over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. I considered telling my friends, but I worried they wouldn't believe me or would think I was overreacting. I felt trapped by my own thoughts. For weeks I was on edge, jumping at every little noise and constantly looking over my shoulder. I couldn't focus in class, and my grades started to slip. My friends noticed that something was off, but I brushed off their concerns, telling them I was just tired. I didn't want to relive the experience by talking about it. Eventually, I convinced myself that maybe it was just a prank, a really bad and terrifying prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The looks on those boys' faces were too intense, too serious. They weren't just messing around. Years later, I can still remember every detail of that night. It's something that stays with you, changes you. I've learned to be more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. But I still wonder why it happened. Why me? Was it just a random encounter, or was I somehow targeted? That question will probably haunt me forever. A couple of years ago, I lived in a big house with a bunch of other guys. We split the rent because it was cheaper, and everyone was short on cash due to college. Everyone except me, I was the only one not in school. One of the guys was a buddy of mine, and I needed a room near my job. They had space, so it worked out well for me since I was bad with money and couldn't afford much. Things got pretty wild quickly. Every weekend, our house turned into a party zone with alcohol, drugs, and lots of people. Thanks to the guys' connections at college, we never ran out of stuff and made sure to keep the parties going every Friday and Saturday night. We had a major fear of missing out, worried that if we skipped a weekend, everyone would find another place to party. Then one bad night changed everything. The house wasn't the same afterward, and I moved out soon after. The other guys stayed because their names were on the lease and they had to be close to school. I had the freedom to save up and leave when I was ready. One night, the house was lit, with music blasting and people dancing and shouting. 2 of our roommates were bartenders, so the kitchen felt like a high-end bar. There were smoke machines, costumes, and themed rooms. It was crazy fun. Around midnight, we heard some commotion in the backyard. We had a big yard with a fire pit, and I was totally out of it, so I don't remember all the details, but usually our parties were chill. When we heard the noise, me and one of the bartenders went to check it out. We found a crowd around two guys who were fighting. One guy looked clean cut and the bartender knew him. The other guy looked weird, scraggly hair, uneven beard, dirty clothes, no shoes. I didn't recognize him, and he gave me a creepy stare. When I asked what was going on, the weird guy said it was a misunderstanding. I was annoyed and told him it was my house and he needed to explain. He started walking toward me, and I got angry. Luckily, the bartender and his friend, who knew the clean-cut guy, came over. They explained that the weird guy had been acting crazy, dancing and singing in a strange language, then spilled a drink on the clean-cut guy's girlfriend and tried to clean it off her. The weird guy argued and got more agitated, but when he saw everyone closing in, he backed down. We kicked him out, warning him not to come back. After that, the party continued as usual, and I really let loose. As the night wound down, I started cleaning up. While I was doing that, I heard a noise coming from one of the bartender's rooms. I thought maybe he hadn't left, but when I checked, it was the weird guy from earlier. He was trying to climb through the window and smiled when he saw me. I panicked and ran back to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and screamed for my roommate Derek. Derek wasn't as blacked out as I thought and tackled the guy. I tried to help but got kicked in the face. The weird guy was screaming in a strange language. Derek told me to call the cops, which I hadn't thought of because of all the drugs. The cops came, along with EMTs. The guy was high on LSD and had wandered to our house after hearing about the party. The cops took him away, and Derek and I didn't go to the hospital. We just iced our injuries and went to bed. I moved out not long after that night. It wasn't personal, I still hung out with the guys, but I didn't want to live where the party was. That night taught me that drugs, paranoia, and late-night stalkers weren't for me. When I was a kid in the 90s, I really hated going to school. At least once a month, I'd wake up and decide I was staying home. I'd do anything to make it happen, pretend to puke, run to the toilet, cry, you name it. And it worked because my parents were busy working all day and couldn't argue with me. By the time I was in 4th grade, 10 years old, they'd just let me stay home alone when I pretended to be sick. One morning I actually woke up feeling awful. My stomach hurt, my throat was on fire, and I couldn't keep anything down. My parents gave me some chicken noodle soup and told me to heat it up if I got hungry, then they went off to work. Even my sister left for school. Since I was used to staying home alone, I planned to have some fun despite feeling sick. I lounged in the recliner, played my favorite video games, and watched cartoons and game shows. When the TV switched to talk shows, I turned it off and wandered around the house. My room was on the 2nd floor with my own TV, PlayStation, and bathroom, so I only went downstairs to find food. The bathroom upstairs creeped me out. For no real reason, I believed in ghosts and thought I saw things down the hall, but I needed to use the bathroom, so I decided to go downstairs. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw something weird out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a big man standing there. I got spooked and ran downstairs, but nothing happened. I went to the bathroom and then the kitchen to check the fridge. As I was looking inside, I heard a jingling noise. The front doorknob was moving back and forth. I looked out the window and saw a skinny old guy peering inside. He smiled in a creepy way and tapped on the glass. I slammed the fridge shut, more worried about my mom getting mad at me for making a mess than about the guy outside. I was only 10 or 11 but thought I was tough. I'd dealt with lots of people coming to our door, so I ran through a mental checklist. This guy wasn't here for my parents and wasn't even knocking. "Hey, why don't you open up the door?" he said. "I was just here yesterday, my head started swimming." Was he here for my dad? My older sister? I almost opened the door but stopped myself. "No way, dude," I said. He got mad, kicked the house, and I jumped. I had an idea. I remembered we kept a paintball gun in the garage. I grabbed it, loaded it with paintballs, and also took a hatchet, just in case. I crept back to the hallway and peeked around the corner. The guy was no longer at the window, so I ran upstairs to my room. Instead of hiding there, I went to the creepy bathroom and climbed out the window onto the roof. I knew I could see the front door from there. I saw the guy fiddling with the door using all sorts of tools. I started shouting video game quotes and cursing at him, then began pelting him with paintballs. He screamed and ran off, threatening me in a creepy voice. I watched as he left, then ran inside and called my mom. She and my dad came home quickly. Turns out someone had been in our house the day before. My parents noticed things out of place and a cigarette in the bathroom sink. The guy had been casing houses in our neighborhood, robbing a few and checking out many others. He didn't expect me to be home that day. Now, we have cameras and better security to prevent anything like that from happening again.